Good evening and
Kia
welcome.
ora.
I suppose it might not be evening when you're listening to this, but whatever time of day it is, welcome to another episode of this stupid podcast.
It's always nighttime when there's no light in your life.
It's true, Todd. It's very true. This is episode something or another. Shout outs to fucking
Nine.
what?
Nine.
9. There you
Is
go.
it 9, Dan?
Fastidious Todd, they call
Yep.
him. The old
Definitely
Todd
9.
Facts.
Number 9.
Fucking Louis Nux. Yeah, number 9. Shout outs to people that put in questions, and there's a bonus episode. If you haven't listened to that, you can go listen to it.
Hell yeah.
No guests last week. We did 2 episodes, but this week we have a guest.
So exciting.
Yep, a very
It's
exciting
like-
guest.
It's like
Christmas
it's like this
mixed
must
with
be
Easter,
this must be what it feels
mixed
like
with election day.
when you come out of a Vipassana.
Sort of.
Sort of. Yeah. Thanks to our patrons.
Thank you, patrons.
Yeah, if you want to be privy to the bonus episodes, you will need to sign up to the Patreon from now on. And speaking of the
What
Patreon,
the fuck is that, Todd?
it was a baby bath falling off a shelf.
Jesus.
You see what's become of my life?
Yeah.
It's fucking chaos.
You- I'm drinking red wine out of a glass because I don't have any bloody beers.
Are you trying to give the guest an impression of sophistication?
Well, I'm not happy about it. I'd much rather be drinking a tasty beer.
Yeah, but yeah, I've never. It would suit your persona to be a wine guy.
It's not nice though, is it? It's not nice, and then you get really hideously drunk
Yeah,
before you know what's happening.
yeah. Back to the patrons. We're up to 42. We're about to hit our first milestone. So get in. What we
45 is
do,
the milestone.
start submitting questions again too, because once
Yep.
we've got enough, we'll hit you with another bonus episode. And we thoroughly enjoyed that. We hope you guys enjoyed it as well. What other housekeeping? Oh, we rarely mention this, but follow our Instagram account, our Twitter account. We're getting pretty active on those things. Or you can follow our personal accounts as well.
And you can also, if you want to go around to Dan's house, you can do that too.
yeah, what's
After 12.
Buzzer
could say
E,
is
just
it-
ring Buzzer E, and he will come and let you in.
we could say his address, but he's just gonna bleep it
Move
out.
house.
Yeah, or you could just edit the audio, but hey, if you want to be drastic,
Your house must be
just-
worth a bit of money now, Dan. Why don't you
Fucking
sell it
move.
and just live off the profits until they run out?
Live, you say.
Why don't you buy us a podcasting residence?
Yeah,
Why don't you buy me a house? I found this house that I really want, Dan. It's up north. It's not very much either.
One at
Why
a
don't you
time.
sell your house and buy that?
How much
Right.
we talking?
It's like 170
For what?
for a house.
Where?
Up in Northland.
Shit.
Needs
That's
a
alright.
bit of work.
What are you gonna do in Northland? Take drugs and write poetry.
Yeah.
Hang out with your
I
dad.
won't have to fucking spend all my day fucking earning rent to fucking live.
Earning rent. You're a landlord.
Well, earning money to pay rent.
Yeah, I got that. Hey, a lot of stuff's come across my desk this week.
You don't even have a desk.
Yeah, I got this fridge with like a blanket thing on it, but I prefer to say it's shorter just to say a lot of stuff's come across my desk.
I've got a desk.
Yeah, do you guys remember Dirty Sesh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I don't know how I came across this, but he
Spell
did
that song?
What song are you talking about?
The COVID one?
Yeah, he's got a COVID conspiracy video he put out.
That's good.
Man, yeah, it's so good.
It's good that he's still making music.
Yeah, it's brilliant. What's he saying? He's like saying that if you have an accidental death, they'll like say it was COVID and psycho shit like that.
Cool.
Yeah,
Speaking of psychos,
yeah.
should we get on with this podcast?
Well,
Oh, we got something
surely.
else to say.
Oh yeah, I got another thing I want to say.
All right, come on then.
Fucking, did you guys see that people were fucking, and supposed leftists too, were like fucking calling for, I don't know, like empathy for Simon Bridges because was it Stuff or News Hub or someone published a word cloud about people's responses to him, and people are like fucking, oh, that's mean, and saying that it was like out of line, and whatever, man. Like, he's a grown man in elected office, like public
But
office.
he's also has policies that or wants to enact policies if he's in power that directly lead to the suffering and death of fucking people, you know? But that's the thing. Those motherfuckers that say that shit, like I saw that dude that started that, I don't know who he is personally, but he's like a lawyer on Twitter, right? And it's like, because to him, you know, you're a fucking lawyer. Like the whole politics is just a fucking game to you, you know what I mean? It's not I mean, I don't know the dude, maybe it is real for him, but it just got that vibe of like, come on now, we all got to be nice and we'll all get along. And it's like, fuck, man, like...
Well, you think about that lawyer's position in life, and who is his like sense of safety and protection more aligned with out of Simon Bridges and the people who Simon Bridges' politics affects?
I mean, to be honest, I know absolutely nothing about this person. He might give all his time and do legal aid work and be an amazing person. But generally people that espouse that kind of nonsense, how should we put it? Maybe
fucking
a little bit of money. Little bit of distance from.
I'm sick of seeing it, man. It's just like
but it's all good because at least people play their hand and you can sort of see. And because I definitely saw some people commenting and liking that shit, and I was like, oh, true.
Oh, right.
That's you know.
Yeah, this weird misguided idea that if you have leftist politics, then you just have to throw fucking empathy and compassion all over the show. No, like. I mean,
I personally think the word cloud thing was fucking stupid, but I also have zero sympathy for that moron. You know what I mean? And
it was stupid, but it's like also a non-issue as well. Like there needn't be any rallying for fucking compassion.
Well, it's sort of this idea of sort of having faux civility, and I think what a lot of people believe is if they show that to these kind of like drop kicks, that they will reciprocate, and they're not gonna fucking do that. Like they've shown time and time again they don't give a fuck, you know what I mean? And it's like, I mean, the Labour Party barely gives a fuck, let alone fucking National and Bridges and that, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if he would have got in, it's like we'd all be fucking dying of coronavirus.
Yep.
He literally wanted to do the herd immunity thing.
Yeah, fuck. Yeah, so it's insane. So fuck Simon Bridges, and from me personally, this is my personal opinion, fuck people who call for empathy for fucking right-wing politicians who don't practice civility.
The old Todd's back.
They don't practice civility with like their actions and their words and everything.
You should go take this out on that guy in the mall who was giving you shit.
I was back at that mall today.
Looking for him, eh?
I had my eyes open.
This is what I like to hear.
Well, I was walking around. I noticed my body language was a little different to normal, a little less relaxed. I was like, oh yeah.
That's funny.
How else are you inspired by the bonus episode? See, if people don't know what we're talking about, go listen to the bonus episode.
Yeah.
All right, let's get this fucking show on the road.
Yeah, nothing gets me ready to fight like this theme music.
Like a bonus episode. Welcome back. A little bit older, a little bit uglier.
We couldn't get another producer, so Dan's back as well.
Look at this, Dan.
We can divulge all this now.
This is what Todd's been itching to get into.
I didn't necessarily like him, but I respected him.
Well, everyone needs jewelry.
He's a maniac.
Further to him crippled.
This is an audio podcast, Dom.
Sure. What do you think, Dan?
1 second, I'm going to do your intro.
Oh, no.
Stunning.
Sorry, our intros.
It's always bad news when Todd's in the fucking intro.
Hey, fuck you. You do bad intros as well. We've got a standard here and it's bad. Today's guest is sorry, let me start again.
Oh, that's a good start.
Your friend.
Auspicious beginnings.
Today's guest is Chloe Swarbrick. She is the third list MP for Green Party Aotearoa. She is Green Party spokesperson for mental health, drug law reform, education, arts and heritage, tertiary education, small business, broadcasting, youth and local government. Also our friend, member and supporter of community, and permanent thorn in the side of old national MPs in Parliament.
Particularly their leaders. Yeah.
Yeah. You give them a hard time.
That's a lot of responsibility you have.
Yeah, look, when you're in a small party, you spin a few plates, We figure out, it's like kind of the thing that all of us do in our day-to-day lives. We're out scrapping and doing bits and pieces, but it just so happens that when you're in Parliament and you got to take on, there's just this amorphous blob of folks who are in the bigger parties, and we got to kind of match them pound for pound, but with way less of us.
Yeah, Dom thought clipping his dog's toenails was a lot of responsibility till he heard that list.
Well, his responsibility's grown because now he's also going to make sure it's on a diet.
Yeah, exactly, Todd. Today I had to organise a get-together of young people, and there's about 15 of them, and it just about killed me. Let alone being in charge of the environment.
I mean, being in charge of young people is a pretty big responsibility, Dom.
It's true, true.
Yeah, they're quite unruly at times.
Yeah.
So I guess
they got futures and stuff.
Yeah, well, perhaps.
Which we're
depends who wins this. Depends who wins this next election. I guess congrats are in order, Chloe. It was pretty heartening to see you get voted third by your peers.
Oh, cheers, bro. Yeah, it's a very weird one because, I mean, to be perfectly honest, the job doesn't change all too much. Just keep your head down and keep up with the mahi. Do I see that you have a little Anakin Skywalker going on at the back of your head, Todd Williams?
Is that what that's called?
Holy moly!
Yeah,
he's been in Australia too long.
It's disgusting, isn't it?
I never knew that your hair was blonde.
Oh, it's not. It's dyed. So it was pink a couple of weeks ago. I'm really, not many people know, but for a brief period of my life, my mother, my sister, and I lived in a trailer park. So it's kind of like, I think this is where this is coming from. Investigating some of my traumas and
just gone full circle.
And just showing them to the world. I know that you're not in politics for accolades and that sort of shit, but when your peers kind of recognize you, it's a nice feeling, right?
Yeah, it's nice being guessed up. You know what it's like, but it's also it's a funny thing. Like, politics is so fragile, and I really regularly think about how folks hit me up when I went with the Greens, and they were like, oh, you could have climbed the ranks, going into one of the bigger parties or whatever. And I was just like, you've really miscalculated this. That was never the vibe. The vibe was always, give it tooth and nail everything you've got, kind of just go hard and try and bring about change. And, here for a good time, not a long time. Like, I've always recognized that every single day could potentially be my last, and that, I have a propensity to say controversial things. But now with this kind of backing, and I guess that's kind of the thing with being a politician associated to a party. It's the same with being anybody associated to any form of representation. You carry a lot of people along with you, and you don't want to let them down. So, we'll work through it. We'll figure it out.
Well, I think that's an incredible thing, though, because going in with that attitude, you saying, how people would say to you, talk about careerism. And that's how they viewed getting into politics. It's kind of like the same thing you get with music, right? Is people are like, oh, don't you want to do this, commercial mainstream thing? And you're like, no. And in your case, it's maintaining your integrity and being there with the intentionality you came in with is actually garnered you quite some
I'm
profile.
Basically a rapper, Todd.
Yeah, you are.
But you know what I mean, eh? It's the setup that I'm really, really proud that I've never had to pretend to be anything other than I'm not. I had all these pot shots coming at me when I first came through, people being like, you're so earnest, that was a bad thing, I cared about shit. And people being like, you're so young, and I'm like, yeah, can't change that, but you're also not particularly good at doing your job, so come at me on that front. But you know what I mean, for real, toe for toe on a skill set basis, and I'll come at you on that. But anybody who wants to have a pop about any of those characteristics that you can't alter, then whatever, that stuff doesn't matter. And I think what ends up happening, looking at colleagues in different places, particularly in other political parties. I think that kind of careerism ends up not necessarily being why people get into the place, but it does end up becoming kind of an unintentional side effect for a few folks.
Yeah, sure.
So it's like, if the way that you get things done is that you are told to sit down, shut up, and to just be a vote, and just wait your turn until you climb up the ranks, and you manage to climb up the ranks by conforming, 10 years later you end up being a person who you don't even recognize, and you have no idea what you believe anymore, by which point in time you perpetuate that cycle. So I think that's kind of the problem with the way that mainstream politics carries out. We need more people who are willing to end their career.
Have you watched The Wire, Chloe?
No, I haven't watched I tried to watch The Wire with my old man when I was younger, and I just could never get into it. I wanted to ask you. Now that I'm old and mature, Dominic Coe, I will give it a crack.
You should. It's really good. But I wanted to ask you if it was much like, because I'm watching the 5th season, which is mostly about politics, and I guess it's more like the mayoral politics of Baltimore. But it's so like when you see that and the sort of like exactly what you're talking about, like the careerism and the sort of like quid pro quo, of people being like, well, you do this and I'll do that. And is that what it's kind of like?
I mean, there's definitely this like weird kind of scratching of back setup, and it's almost like, I think that the facade of professionalism that goes along with politics, the reason that so many people, particularly working class people, who have the most to gain by engaging in politics and therefore changing it, because there's far more folks who are being screwed over by the system than those who are creaming it. But they look at politics and they go, it's these dudes in suits who are in their ivory towers. I'm not having a bar of that because it's all BS. But the problem with that kind of approach, right, is that you end up giving those people license to continue doing what they're doing, because you're not, it's a hall pass. You're not saying, stop that, I'm not going to put up with that. We accept the politics we think we deserve. And I think with the kind of behind the scenes stuff, if people recognized how much politicians were making things up on the fly and doing things by the seat of their pants, they're just regular human beings who are doing the best they can with the resources available to them. But there's this weird kind of perversity that comes with trying to pretend like you know what you're doing all the time. And it distorts people.
Would you say if the beehive was a zoo, you would be a honey badger? I don't know where we're going with that. I don't know what is that what you're describing me as? Oh, I admire honey badger, so it's a compliment.
Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah. I think, before we get into more of this, whatever this is, I think so the list came out for the Green Party the other day. And it's pretty exciting. Friend of the podcast, Kaya Spark, who we had on last week. She came in at 19.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and awesome. Ricardo March came in at
number 9 or 10. Yeah,
9 or 10. Yeah,
he's amazing, that dude.
Yeah, he's a sicko. He's awesome.
Future guest of the podcast, Ricardo March, I should say. Future friend. Something I've noticed. I don't know if this is strategic on your part or just the way you naturally operate, but the National Party do a lot of bad faith arguments, and when that's come across your table, you just kind of call them on it. Like, was it Bennett you invited to debate you about drug reform on TV, and then so they want to pot shot you, but they don't really want to face off, right?
No, they don't want to go toe to toe. They don't want to give me the respect of turning up to have those debates, right? And this is another one of the weird things that happens in politics. Like, it's all these tall tales and all of these kind of sound bites, and it's not a lot of the getting into the thick of it and why we're doing stuff. And that's the real problem that I find, particularly with, whether it's environmental, social, or criminal justice issues. Like, all of that stuff is not about factually, evidentially, what the best thing to do is. It's just people arguing from these tiny, minute little value propositions, which basically play to people's fears. And, I found particularly on the drugs issue, like, it's real funny. Someone put up a tweet maybe like a year and a half ago being like, maybe the reason that politicians don't want to talk about cannabis is because they'll end up like in the Herald in a cartoon smoking a bong. And bro, I actually have the first cartoon that I was ever in the Herald in is me smoking a giant bong.
Oh, wow.
And that's the thing. It's true. Like, you will be stereotyped if you go up against this stuff, because it's decades and decades of stigma and stereotyping and all the rest. But I'm more than happy to wade into that stuff because no one else is willing to do it. And again, it's the right thing to do. I remember being actually at Childish Gambino and out in the field and just out of Auckland not too long ago, last year sometime, at this gig.
Yeah.
And I was approached by a journalist who will remain nameless but was pretty drunk. And they hit me up and they were like, do you actually believe in the drug stuff that you're pushing? Do you actually believe in the drug law reform stuff that you're pushing? And I really like investigated and interrogated their position. And I was like, yeah, I do. Like, I've done a lot of research on this stuff, and you know, I've seen people's lives entirely destroyed by drugs. But worse than that, I've seen people's lives entirely destroyed by the response that we have, particularly through the criminal justice system, to their use of drugs, and how we continue to push them further and further underground. You can accept that a drug will cause harm, but the next step then has to be, are you willing to accept that the criminal justice system, the health system, the housing system, the education system, you wrap around that drug can either increase or decrease that harm? Because right now we're seeing it skyrocket. And that actually, just like having that interaction, which was a real casual one, but it really reinforced for me that, you know, there are a bunch of people who treat this stuff as a game.
Yeah.
We were just talking about that before we before you came on.
Yeah. And it's such a...
It's people's lives.
Yeah.
It's people's lives. Like, when you, like, that's the thing that drives me insane when, you know, we go into this place that's supposedly like the House of Representatives, this chamber, which is like the literal ivory tower, you know, this wood paneled, plush seats, plush carpet setup. And you've got all of these people talking about poor people and about small business owners and about farmers and about the environment as though they're these ambiguous kind of amorphous concepts.
Yeah.
And I just really want to, you know, you see school kids' faces sometimes up in the gallery. They can't come in right now because of COVID, but prior, and, you know, they would watch Question Time and they would watch their representatives behave worse than kids are allowed to behave at school, and these people were supposedly running the country, you know?
Yeah.
It's real out the gate.
So do you feel like part of the reason why you're sort of not like that and you've avoided that is because am I right in assuming that you kind of fell into this more than it was like a sort of life plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that kind of thing, right? Like, I'm real privileged, and I'm the first person in my family to have gone to university, and I have experienced losing everything as, you know, a kid, and my situation with my background, and I'm used to having nothing. So I think for me, it's this real intense kind of feeling that, you know, I built myself back up through finding community, and I've been at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to particularly mental health. And, you know, I've done stuff like abuse alcohol to feel like I was trying to survive, but actually just, you know, sooner or later coming to recognize it's a form of escapism. And for me, it's just like, what's the point? I also, you know, at uni, like, I studied philosophy, and that was just this massive way of opening the door to the mind for me. Basically coming to realize that we get to choose the society that we want to live in, and I hate bullies. I hate bullies, and I'm not willing to let people bully all my mates who are incredibly creative and can contribute so much to society. I'm not willing to let them be bullied out of my city because they can't afford to live there. You know, that belongs to us, and we built it. And it's about recognizing those power dynamics and how things can be done better.
There's nothing like having been rock bottom and then built yourself back up as a precursor for making a passion project out of a career, right? Like,
I feel like this is all of our backstory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we talked about this on another episode of the podcast, but we I've got some mates who aren't from that background, and with all the COVID stuff, they were really freaking out because they have a lot to lose, I guess. And sort of me and my other mate were sort of explaining to him, it's like, yeah, I mean, we might lose everything, but it's not that bad. Like, it sucks, but it's, you know what I mean? Like, you still get to hang out with your mates, and you can have a beer, and maybe, you know what I mean?
In the initial weeks, all I could think about too was like, this is like, I was quite happy to welcome the rest of society into the existence that most of the people I know have been living for their entire lives, or big parts of their lives at least. And it was like, this is what it's like.
Yeah, it was really interesting talking to mates of mine, who go on real precarious kind of jobs, bouncing around in kind of the literal gig economy, as musicians or actors or whatever. And some of them saying, with the support that the government stepped up to provide, noting, of course, that it wasn't flawless, but that provided them the greatest security that they've had in years. And how for them, as you say, Todd, like it was welcoming everybody into this little insight of how the world works for so many people. Yeah. But also, I think that people kind of gloss over the fact that, particularly in Aotearoa, there were 2 very different lockdowns occurring across the country. People in South Auckland were having a very different experience to those in Parnell and Ponsonby. Yeah. And it's been fascinating to watch the way that some people have experienced commentary to that effect, to that truth, as some kind of attack on who they are. And it's just like, hold up, like we can recognize inequality and that it's not all good, and we can try and fix that. And that's not a pop at you. It's not about you. We're actually elevating the stories of other people right now.
Yeah, that attitude's crazy, right?
But you can still be like, this is difficult for me, and that's fine. But,
totally.
But you don't have to pretend that it's not way more difficult for others.
Totally. And that's the conversation that so many people find so difficult to have around, notions of privilege and stuff. And I think maybe what needs to happen is we just all need to slow down the metabolism a little bit, because I was actually talking, now this is about to go down a massive rabbit hole, but I was talking not too long ago with this guy who was actually over in New Zealand in March. His name's Caleb Kane, and he is the guy who is at the centre of the investigation by the New York Times into how young men in particular become radicalised on the internet. And the fascinating kind of parallels between notions of feeling as though society is unequal, which is all the stuff that, kind of people on the so-called left of politics talk about. But how then if you wedge into that conversation the notion of culture wars, you can start blaming women, or you can start blaming black people, or you can start blaming, whoever you want to blame for that situation, as opposed to looking at the real economic drivers and the power structures as they exist. And who benefits when all of these everyday kind of little people, for lack of a better term, all of us everyday folks are fighting each other? It's the people who are just getting on with continuing to cream it.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. One day you're just like watching a little Geordie B. Peterson video about lobsters and tidying your room, and then the next day you're thinking monogamy should be forced upon women, and then you're watching Alex Jones.
No, but for real, it's a slippery slope. And in this podcast, which has Caleb on it, it's called like the black hole or something. I was listening to it just yesterday coming down on the plane to.
Hey, don't recommend podcasts that are better than ours.
No, definitely not better than this. This is the best podcast of all time.
Okay, thank you.
This is just side note, sidebar, like little reference point.
I'm noting this down. I'm gonna listen.
Yeah, the stuff that they were talking about is just they went and interviewed this French guy who created the algorithm for YouTube initially, who has this specialty in artificial intelligence, and how basically the intention of that algorithm with regard to recommending videos was all about trying to keep people on YouTube for as long as possible. So continuing to recommend stuff inside of their bubble. And the problem with that is that you literally can go and watch an issue and only ever be recommended one perspective or one side on that issue.
Yeah.
I've noticed from my acquaintances that or even one of my close friends has actually been radicalized in that way. And it's really like, it seems to be oftentimes people who are really smart, but are quite sheltered. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of like, and then, you know, going to a protest or doing any kind of activism seems a bit kind of, oh, that's a lot of work, you know what I mean? Whereas you can be on YouTube and sort of like, and my one mate's always talking about how he's worked things out. Hey man, I've worked this out now. I've sorted this. It's like, you don't work shit out, man. If it's on YouTube, it's no fucking secret, you know.
But it's funny because it actually like some of the ideas, kind of as you say, like quite smart. Like these are people who are looking for answers for the way that the world works, and they have generally a healthy skepticism towards things like mainstream narratives. But the problem is they then end up getting sucked in by people who they put on a pedestal and they don't apply the same levels of critique to.
Yeah. Most of the stuff I've seen that sucks people in is just pure sophistry though, right?
Yeah.
It's like actually fucking nonsense if you investigate
We have that on Talkback Radio, my friend,
Oh,
and those
wow.
people rate highly.
Hey, speaking of men that hate women, there's a new man in my life. His name's Todd Muller.
Oh.
Can we discuss Todd Muller quickly? Let me set this up by saying that Chloe, you almost made him famous, but
Oh yeah, I saw your tweet, bro.
yeah. Sorry for adding you. I had to, and then adding him. But so for listeners, the term "okay boomer" was your response to him heckling you in Parliament. Todd. And fuck, so there's two Todds in the National Party. I don't know why my parents gave me such a Tory name. I'm real pissed now. I was pissed before. Now I'm super pissed.
Same number of letters.
What do you mean? Yeah.
Todd Tory. That's the point that I was making there.
Yeah. Fuck. I'm so pissed at my parents. Dad, if you're listening, get fucked. And now I've forgotten where I was going.
Do you remember, Todd, when we met your dad on K Road? We were having a beer outside of Verona and your old man sidles on by. That was such a time. Anyway,
you were interviewing me. Do you remember?
Yes.
Do you remember what he said when he turned up?
I think he was talking about testing pea houses.
Probably, but he said I knew you'd be here. As though it was some sort of psychic shit, and I was like, "How?" And he was like, "'Cause you're my son." I was like, "All right." Anyway, back to Todd Muller. He's had a big week. New National Party leader usurped the ever so pathetic Simon Bridges, and has Nikki K as his deputy. But so it's been an interesting week. The photo of him with the MAGA hat came out. Most certainly, the more that story develops, because he originally said, I'm taking that to my office where I'll display it. Now he's like, I won't display it. But it seems like a very calculated dog whistle to me. I don't know if I'm too paranoid and suspicious, but fucking hell. And I saw... So originally I was like, oh, this is funny. This is hilarious. The National Party is like just flailing so bad at the moment, and I love it. And then I was talking with a friend, and she was like, oh, he'll never, be elected. He has no charisma. He's not personable. And I was like, oh, but wait, that reminds me of a certain national leader that we had in power for fucking many years. Yeah, and now I'm a little bit terrified.
Yeah, the funny thing about that heckle situation, so I don't think many
What did he say?
Proper know the backstory. So
please.
I was talking on I think it was the second reading of the climate change response zero carbon bill, which is the zero carbon bill, which basically sets our pathway to reduce emissions. And I was talking, I'd actually dealt with Todd for months and months, probably about a year.
Because he was the climate change spspokesperson for National,
he was the climate change spokesperson. So we worked together, we worked together on the Environment Select Committee. And he's actually the guy who led the National Party to blocking the declaration of a climate emergency, which I was trying to negotiate with them. So we had a bit of a backstory there. And I was talking about how, everybody's talking about 2050 like it's a bajillion years away. But, in 2050, I'm going to be 56 years old. Like, I'm the age of so many people in this parliament, actually younger than a lot of people who are currently in this parliament.
True.
So it's not like a million miles away for me. I'm still going to be here and have 30 years to kick around if, everything isn't burning. And I was making that point, and then was talking about how the average age in parliament is something like 49 years old or something. And yeah, Todd just started going off, yelling something about that. And I actually didn't hear what he said. But I had clear in my mind because I'd seen my little brother the weekend before. He had been showing me TikTok, and OK Boomer was a little meme that was circulating on there. And so it was just in my head. So I just said it. And it's wild how that has ended up being something which, like, I feel like I have tried to work real hard on some stuff. Like, bro, I got unanimous law passed to create a pool of funding available for candidates with disabilities to run barrier-free elections. I have, negotiated with the Minister of Justice across the Parliament to bring about this legislation, which is drafted to the tune of about 150 pages to legalise and regulate cannabis in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I have done changes on the zero carbon bill, all of these things. None of it matters except for the meme. So it's wild. But yeah, I think we'll see what Todd ends up doing in the role. I think it's been real funny seeing certain people go back to kind of hypothecating about the Greens working with National again after this. Like, if only we just gave up on all of our values and they gave up on all of their values, then maybe we could be valueless together.
It was wild, the people that were suggesting that last election, like, real left-wing people, and they were just like, well, now's the time for them to work together. And I was like, how the fuck are they going to work together? And like, what do you think's going to happen? Like,
Oh, totally. I mean, and that's the real tragedy of looking at stories like the Māori Party, for example, and interestingly, if you look at their track record, particularly in the last term that they were knocking about, in Parliament, they actually, with only 2 MPs, managed to get some substantial wins across the line in the budget for Māori, but they just didn't have the oxygen to talk about it, and because they ended up just ushering through so many things that seemed in complete contravention of what they stood for, voters made the judgment they did.
Yeah, it's sad. So from going earlier in the week to thinking Todd was just another innocuous national guy with an egg-shaped head.
Fuck, you really came with the $10 words tonight, Todd.
Thank you. What I said sophistry before?
Yeah.
Did you like that one?
Else earlier.
Yeah. But
He's got this new word a day app, and it's really changed him.
I love it.
I do not have a word a day app, you prick. I came across this thread on Twitter. Do you know who Clint Smith is, Chloe?
Clint Smith?
Former senior communications strategist for Jacinda Ardern.
Okay, yeah.
And ministerial advisor. Anyway, he posted a thread on Twitter today about and it's quite detailed, but if you guys don't mind, I just want to read through it because it's kind of sick reading and
get your sophistry on.
It speaks to who Todd Muller actually is. So, allow me. New Zealanders supported removing abortion from the Crimes Act and modernising the law by 3-1. So Muller is already on the hard side of New Zealand conservatism and voting against it. But his votes on abortion were far more hardline than you might realise. In the committee stage, MPs can vote on proposed edits to a bill. On the abortion bill, Muller voted for nearly all the proposed anti-choice amendments. And they were so extreme. Sorry, there's typos in here. And there was such extreme stuff in there. A lot of these ideas weren't even supported by other anti-choice MPs. Muller voted to, and this bullet points, make it harder to get medical approval for an abortion, remove safe areas from places where abortions are conducted, require providers to consider the attitude of a woman's ethnic religious community towards abortion, require providers to consider the views of Māori, women's whānau, hapu and iwi when deciding whether to provide an abortion, remove a requirement that medical practitioners who object to conducting abortions at least tell the woman where she can get one, make it illegal for a provider not to hire someone who opposes abortions, require a woman to reveal how many previous live births and abortions she's had, make it illegal to abort a fetus with deformities or genetic abnormalities, even fatal ones, remove the right for a girl under 16 to choose an abortion without parental consent, misleading...
How many more of these is there, Todd?
It's nearly done.
I think we get the idea.
No, this is important. Misleadingly renamed the bill the Abortion Legislation Bill. He voted against requiring DHBs in health to provide emergency contraception and against practitioners with an objection to performing abortions having to tell the woman where the closest provider is. And yeah, that's about it. So that's who my man Todd is. That's evil.
Yeah, a lot of those. So I was in the House.
Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of this, right?
Parliament, yeah, during the debate and the voting and the filibustering. If you want to add a new term to your sophistry, Todd.
I've been following a lot of American politics, so yeah.
Oh yeah, so you know what filibustering is.
Yeah.
But for the other folks who may not be so acclimatized to American politics, it is essentially this process of utilizing all of the possible time available to you to delay the oncoming or passage of a bill. And we experienced exactly that, particularly from, some so-called pro-life, deeply conservative MPs who were putting forward some deeply misleading supplementary order papers, which are effectively amendments to the core piece of legislation. And that is where a lot of the false information ended up coming from, which was really damaging and awful. I, in the past 2.5, nearly 3 years, have received some pretty awful correspondence because, of course, I'm a young woman in this place, and I hold obviously progressive views, which means that you're always pushing against change, trying to change things, pushing against conservatism. But the photos and videos that people were sending, the things that people were accusing us of, and all of that was built on fear-mongering that had no factual basis. And it was all about attempting to construe a narrative of what would be plausible under this so that it could attempt to appeal to people who didn't read too much into the fine detail of what conservatives were putting out there. So yeah, it is gutting that that's his track record on stuff. And, that's kind of the point of my colleague, Gauri's, who said that, she's kind of sick of all of the conversation and focus just being on a hat, because actually it goes far deeper than that. The symbolism is one thing, but if you look at the guy's voting record, it pretty much aligns with what that hat symbolizes in terms of women's rights.
Yeah.
So do you think that the National Party have just put all their cards in the sort of, Trumpian sort of ultra-right basket and just...
I don't think New Zealand's there, eh? I mean, I hope
not.
That I really hope not. But I also know, if you remember the kind of lashback that Taika Waititi got when he talked about, New Zealand having a really racist undercurrent, 3-4 years ago. And he was accused of being a traitor and all of these other things by talkback radio hosts and commentators on breakfast TV. If we're not able to look ourselves in the mirror and to recognize where we need to change and how we hold people back, then I'm worried.
Yeah.
So, I looking particularly and speaking to people on the ground and going around actually the whole country, I know that there are pockets of really good people who are fighting really good causes. So, you've got to be earnest to do this job. You've got to believe in it. You've got to believe in our better nature. Yeah,
but I think, when I think about these things, I'm always I'm so detached from that New Zealand, conservative New Zealand. And so I'm like, oh, not in a million years could like some Trumpian shit fly in this country. But then,
it's real funny. I did this interview ages and ages ago with Mike Hosking about cannabis.
oh
and,
shit, I listened to
hero.
that.
Yeah, he decided to kind of hang up on me after telling me that I knew nothing about life because I have no kids. And I posted something about it on social media, and my old man like scans my particularly my Facebook page. He loves it. He loves telling me about the comments and then calling me up and giving me his political theories. And this is why I save Dad to the weekends, because otherwise I just have hours of monologue on a weekly basis.
Right.
But he was on my page and he was like, "Oh, everyone thought that you like absolutely nailed it against Hosking," and I was like, okay, Dad, like I know that you like love me and I know that you're on my page. Also, Dad, you're on my page. Like go on Mike Hosking's page and I guarantee you'll see another side of that story. And he went on it and he was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And like this is the guy, actually the day that I was first in Parliament, there was a protest just down, I'm in Parliament at the moment, I was just, down across the road.
Are you live from the Beehive right now? Are you live from the Beehive right now?
I'm live from Bowen House, which is across the road, connected by an underground travelator to to the
Really?
So almost. I actually felt a quake today. But I was across the road before Parliament even began to sit. So it was like 8 a.m. There were a bunch of anti-oil and gas protesters. And I was like, man, this is the kaupapa. Like, we only ever managed to really get somewhere with this hard edge of people who are willing to fight the fight. And then, people like us in Parliament then finally getting on board with it. But you have to get the traction, the media spotlight, and then that helps to change people's minds and perspectives. Anyway, I was out there doing that kind of piece and then came back through into work at like 8:30. And then all of a sudden it was blowing up on Talkback Radio, and particularly on Hosking, that, our taxpayer dollars are going towards Chloe Swarbrick being at, this protest. And okay, I was like, firstly, it's like before anybody like is at work, and particularly in Parliament. But secondly, I am elected to represent all New Zealanders, and the people who are out there protesting against oil and gas probably put me in this job, and they deserve representation too.
Yeah.
But the other thing, which is just mind-blowing to think about, is that, the kind of sophistry that you were talking about before, Todd, that really just winds people up and is like serving as controversy fodder for sake of controversy, unfortunately really fuels a lot of people's lives. And we need to find a way to reach those people because they need to believe that things can be better.
Yeah. Well,
I feel like the media in this country is really conservative though, and I think that makes it really hard, because you're sort of like, well, if you listen to Hosking, if you read stuff, the Herald, obviously, it's kind of like, oh my god, like this right wing hellhole do we live in? But then how much of that is just because those people come up through their own version of that careerist thing is the same as politicians, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned back at number one independent radio station, 95 BFM, is, that whatever you do in terms of journalism, you end up presenting a bias. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing, but in the way that you choose to cover certain stories and not others, the people that you choose to interview for those stories, and then the quotes that you decide to use, all of those are value judgments, and they whittle down a story to tell a tale which isn't necessarily the full picture. And I think that a lot of people forget that media inherently is a medium of reality. You are not aware of the fact that there are currently wars raging seemingly eternally overseas. You have never seen Trump firsthand. I don't know if you guys have. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, all of these things are mediated through whether it's newspapers or television or radio. And that's why it's really important to have a healthy kind of critique and to read this diversity of different opinions, because otherwise we end up in our bubbles.
Yeah, hard out. I think that goes back to that point too of like, there was 2 points we talked about today. There was obviously the OK Boomer, but I think there was a more salient one where the Muller's hat, as opposed to what his action speaks to, like what he actually does, rather than what this hat represents. And I think so often, we get swept up in spectacle, like the hat is the talk of the week, and then his voting record in Parliament is like hidden in the cracks of Twitter, and like it's much harder to access. But
yeah, and it feels like you're just like searching for treasure or something. But it's kind of that process, right, where when information is really hard for people to access, and this is the distinction, right, between transparency and accessibility, and therefore accountability. Our Parliament often holds itself out to be, because we consistently rank like the top in terms of Transparency International, even though, we're up against some not great other jurisdictions. But that transparency means ultimately nothing if you turn to the content of Parliament's website or to laws that are being passed and you can't read them. If you don't have any understanding, because it is so imbued in the kinds of language that is intended to be impenetrable to the everyday person, then that transparency means nothing. And this was the whack thing that I remember kind of learning about in law school, alongside a bunch of people who would have found me insufferable because I was the kid who would argue with them about the treaty and stuff. I remember actually having this fight with this young Nat in my first ever public law class, where they were like, nah, the treaty's irrelevant. And I was like, yeah, maybe it's never been relevant to you. But that law is created by a bunch of people who have access to resources, who then get to create systems that reinforce those systems. And they essentially get to perpetuate the way that things are. And that makes it really difficult to change things, particularly so that they operate better for everybody else.
Yeah, well, the other day I tried to, when because I didn't know anything about Muller except that you said, okay, boomer to him. And
because he looks like every other fucking national politician. They all look the same. So it's like...
Last year he was 31 on the Nats list as well.
I thought you were going to say he's 31 years old. I was like, damn, what's he been up to?
I'm just being a fucking Tory.
Way off the myth, Miller.
It'll have that effect on you. But and so I tried to, when he became leader, I tried to search his voting record on Parliament. And I couldn't find shit except abortion law reform. But I couldn't find any other records of how he votes and where he's voted on what issue. And I was like, that information should be accessible to me. I need it.
Maybe you could become some kind of like politics journalist, Todd.
I don't have the...
It's exactly what we need. You need to break it down.
I don't have the nous for that. But in regards to access, transparency, and like engagement, before...
Fuck, you're on fire tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I'm loving the compliments. And in regards to those things I just said that I've now forgotten,
Sorry, Todd.
How do we get like so green? The green it's quite interesting because the National Party list came out, the new one, the reshuffle came out about the same time as the Green Party list, and it couldn't be just so
more different.
Yeah, it couldn't be more
pretty
vast.
stark.
Any more vastly different. And the Green Party list made me feel excited and enthused. And I'm like, how do we get people like Kaya and Ricardo and the rest of your colleagues, how do we get them into Parliament? What do we need to do? Like what?
Yeah.
How do we campaign for these people?
So the campaigning, bro, it's like proper real grassroots stuff, eh?
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it was actually Ricardo who helped teach me back in 2017 how to do a lot of this kind of door knocking, phone calling, all this stuff. And then that's kind of the thing that you learn when you become involved in something. You take on those skills and then you're able to teach them to others. And I mean, what I'm really gutted about as a result of, obviously the tragedy that is COVID-19 and we've literally had people who have lost their lives and then others losing their livelihoods. But that's had this flow-on effect in the inability of us to congregate as communities. And the real challenge there is trying to figure out, I had all these ideas at the start of this year for bringing people together with like live music and art and all that stuff that I kind of came up with. But we are going to have to find new ways to do those things. So I think it's just organizing. Like, I have been involved in a bunch of different issues over the past few years, particularly over the past kind of few months. It's been really interesting to see, particularly the fight back from students at Vic Uni, who were like, actually, we're not going to pay the institution when they told us that we should probably go home during the lockdown. And then they tried to charge us. And all these kids went on a rent strike. I was like, this is amazing. Yeah. This is the kind of student kind of solidarity and action that I have been waiting for almost my whole life. I've been waiting for everybody to recognize the inherent power that they have when we come together as a collective, because these kids then won. Yeah. And that to me, again, is just a really important part of realizing that nobody ever achieves anything meaningful alone. And when you feel real powerless, you need to connect with others. There are so many people doing such amazing stuff, like NGOs, even people like, Jackie from the Aunties, who's just been coordinating, looking after these women for years and years and years, only finally starting to be recognized and the tip of the iceberg of her mahi being seen. But if you want to get involved, particularly for the Greens, you can go on our website and you can sign up to volunteer, or just hit up one of the candidates that is around where you live, or one of the ones who inspire you the most. Inspiration is literally just a reflection of the things that you admire about yourself, which that person brings out in you. So stick around the people who inspire you and keep bringing that shit to the fore.
Yeah, the cool thing about New Zealand and the opportunity to politically campaign is because I was just following like Bernie Sanders' campaign very closely. I'm still very heartbroken.
Yeah, bro, can I just get up and stand up? I literally today finally got this shirt.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I have been waiting for this shirt for about 6 months, and it finally arrived. For those who are just listening, it's an old photo of Bernie Sanders, which has the text "Rage Against the Machine," and it, like, I remember being devastated when Bernie stepped down, and then this shirt arrived today, and I was like, oh man, that's so gutting.
Yeah, I'm getting
this is the most heartbreaking thing.
I'm getting a Bernie tattoo when you can get tattooed again, and I love that picture on that shirt of him, because that era Bernie Sanders looks so Jewish, and it reminds me of about they tried to sabotage him for like being an anti-Semite, and his grandparents died in the Holocaust, and he looks so Jewish, and they were gonna try the shit they pulled on Corbyn, and just like when you see those older photos of him, and you're like, oh man, you're hella Jew.
But also, dude, you listen to the interviews of him back then, and he is saying the same stuff. He believes in the same things. And that kind of consistency, you talk about kind of careerist politics, and it's funny because that is a different kind of thing. People who are into careerist politics do stuff so that they can advance themselves, as opposed to the kaupapa. What you see with people like Bernie is that he was able to continue to stay engaged in a role, despite everything, and maintain the kaupapa ahead of careerist advances. Yeah. And I think that's consistently the tension with politicians. It's like, on a day-to-day basis, do you want to choose you? Or do you want to choose the kaupapa? Do you want to choose the values? Do you want to choose the principle? Because one of them will get you to the top quite easily, but the other is like pushing shit up a hill, but it is meaningful.
And imagine the shit that you'd get, the sort of things you'd be offered in the States, as a politician. It's like the things he must have turned down.
Oh, for sure.
Oh,
have you guys seen the real old photo of him being arrested at a civil rights march?
Yeah.
Like he's a young man in the photo, and it's like, damn, he's just his whole life. He's held his principles and values. Fuck, he's beautiful. I love like how much you love and adore him, and he just kind of seems cantankerous and grumpy. Like
Bemused by the whole situation, eh?
Yeah. And it makes
he's just there to just be like, stick it to the man. Like, he's still sticking it to the man. He's the inverse of the old man shakes fist at clouds meme. Like, he's still out there, like, not just having a pop at anything for the sake of it, but he's had the same theory of change the whole time. And that's what's real interesting, right, is that his movement finally found its time when it was a movement, and it wasn't just him kind of, the sole guy being arrested. And that's probably one of the most important lessons, is that, it doesn't end with him. There's been that crew called the Justice Democrats who have started to organize around being real gutted by, the likes of him not becoming the DNC nominee president. And that has seen some really progressive candidates ending up coming through the ranks of the DNC who otherwise wouldn't have had a look in sideways, like AOC, Ilhan Omar, and otherwise.
Yeah, so sick. And he's like still like, he's obviously lost the race for the nomination, but he's doing more than the nominee about like what is presently happening. And like all the other candidates, dead quiet. They ain't doing shit. They've got nothing to say because their goal was a fucking seat, not change. But for him,
and that's consistently the trade-off, right? Like, you don't get to do both of those things at the same time. You don't get to put yourself first and put the co-operator first. Like, you have to either go for the collective or for the individual. And I mean, that's what leadership is.
Do you think there's much sort of hope for New Zealand to move in that sort of more, get away from that sort of neoliberal system we've been under for so long now, and maybe more towards that social democrat thing that Bernie's been pushing?
I think there is a real potential with it if we manage to galvanize the opportunity that's been presented with a mass kind of recognition of the importance of all of us sticking together and changing things that happens, around COVID-19. Recognizing, of course, as we kind of spoke to at the start, that different people had different kind of experiences, and also that, in the words of Iona Holstead, who's the Secretary of Education, this pandemic didn't create inequality, it exposed it. And I think what I worry about is people just kind of having this real rose-tinted lens of nostalgia for business as usual. Because we just want a coffee, we just want a beer, we just want to hang out with our mates, so we'll take it at any cost. But the problem is that things were pretty cooked before COVID came along, and if we just enable those walls to come back up again, they will. So I think that the best kind of lesson from COVID is that all these things that we were told were impossible by governments and by politicians for years and years and years, flexible working arrangements for people with disabilities and sole parents, raising the core benefits, finding different ways to enable people to get access to support. All of these things, housing homeless people sleeping on the streets.
That one was crazy.
Yeah, all these things that we were told were impossible happened almost overnight, and that has demonstrated clear as day that they are fundamentally a matter of political willpower. And if we enable things to go back to business as usual, that will be a failure of political willpower, but also of all of us not holding politics to account. And this is the real insidious feedback loop of kind of neoliberalism. And I worry that a lot of people aren't quite conscious of what neoliberalism what it really means and what it really entails.
Oh, they know now because Dom and I explained it real, like,
really
eloquently.
Refer
to podcast XYZ.
No, we did we did a terrible job. Please continue.
Well, in its modern conception, it's basically third way kind of politics, which is, in a nutshell, this kind of bizarre centrism that says, hey, you know what? We don't think that the state is going to be able to deliver support and help for people. So instead, we're going to cut costs and try and do that through market mechanisms. And that basically applies this market ethos of competition to what should be basic provision of support for people who are struggling. And then you can apply that to a raft of different things. But long story short, it also ends up in some real perverse outcomes, particularly for things like public transport, which we end up subsidizing private companies, and they end up making a profit off of something that should be public. And it costs us all more in the long run. Anyway, so the big challenge, I think, with the modern kind of rat race that we're stuck in is that right now we are at the logical endpoint of it, which is the epidemic of mental ill health, substance abuse, dependency, and addiction. You know, you look at the mental health and addiction inquiry that came out from the government approximately 6 to 12 months ago now, and it reflects all of this contemporary research, but also anything that anyone who, you know, has worked in the front lines of helping folks who have dealt with homelessness or with addiction or whatever over, you know, the past several years. And it's basically that the two major driving factors of mental ill health and addiction are isolation and trauma. And whether you have an underlying predisposition to manifest mental ill health or not, your environment can either exacerbate or mitigate that. And then there's all of these other factors, most importantly, the likes of poverty. And I just find it really ridiculous that we are still trapped in this discussion about, how do we get poor people out of poverty? And the answer isn't, give them more money so they're not trapped in poverty. It's, punish them more so that they'll find more motivation to get out of poverty.
Yeah.
How whack is that logic? But it is so entrenched in the way that we view society and the way that we view each other. And also we're taught that if someone who is poor gets something, they're taking it off of you. And that is such a failure of our modern understanding or conception of the social contract.
Well, I think something that's even crazier that neoliberalism does is it convinces poor people that they're not poor. And so that you meet poor people.
They're millionaires in waiting.
Yeah. And they have that same attitude towards other poor people. And it's like, motherfucker, you're the same. Like, it's like if you lose your job, you're on the street in 2 weeks. But it's like because people got a big TV or something, they think that they're,
and I mean, like, I was having this real interesting discussion, right? Because social media is real interesting. A lot of folks tell me not to read the comments because they're like, it's all gnarly and nasty and stuff. But I think, I obviously have I definitely do block the most awful of the awful. If people just are straight up ad hominem, then sorry, mate, you're gone. But if there is a grain of truth and people look like they're engaging in somewhat good faith, even if they're coming at me just to, have a pop, I'll respond to them politely and I'll try and unpick what they're thinking. And I was talking a few months ago about how I think fundamentally education should be barrier-free and therefore it should be free. And this is all forms of education at a tertiary, polytech level, etc., apprenticeships. And this guy was saying, I don't want to, as a minimum wage worker, pay for people who end up earning more because they get a degree. And I'm like, hold up, it's not you who's going to pay for this. Who do you think pays for this? Actually, we should raise the top tax bracket and we should tax capital, because if your theory is that people earn more when they get a degree, then they can end up paying for it that way. But also, there are a whole ton of people who get educations to become things like teachers and nurses who definitely don't do it for the pay increase. Yeah. It's to contribute to society. And I think we all need to recognize that fundamentally all of us are in this together. And, the fact that you can walk into a building and it doesn't collapse means that you have benefited from somebody else's education. The fact that I can get acute appendicitis and not die means that I have benefited from somebody else's education. Like, we live in society. There is no one man on an island here.
Well, try telling the libertarian I was discussing these things with the other day that... I'd never spoken to a libertarian until last week, and I was like, that is
a yarn, bro. I mean, to be just completely full free and frank with you, when I was 18 and at uni and in my first few years of doing a philosophy degree, I was like, I kind of understand libertarianism. Yeah. Because it's just like, you do your thing and then the state doesn't interfere. Yeah. But then I was like...
It sounds nice, right?
Yeah, it does, great. Until you start investigating it more and you realize that actually giving everybody these so-called freedoms, if not everybody has the resources to access those so-called freedoms, then not everyone's free.
Yeah,
It's just like anarchism for people with no friends, you know?
yeah. Well, just
Dom, you need to write a politics book.
it's a recipe for feudalism. I did back to like the idea of like what happens now, what happens post COVID, and touching on like neoliberal arguments for reopening everything while it's still dangerous, which is, people are going to kill themselves if they have to keep staying home. It's like
that one really made me so angry.
Yeah, people are killing themselves because of their jobs and feeling purposeless, and like we have a suicide problem that exists already. People are pretending like it doesn't fucking already exist. But the point I did want
they're pretending if we get back on the merry-go-round, everything will be all jazz.
Yeah.
But, actually the statistics show the opposite of that. They show that when we went into lockdown, actually the numbers went down at this point in time. That is the indicative research.
So many people said to me that it was like the first time they'd had a break, of some description. And this is not just people that live in a nice house or whatever. This is people that are actually probably in a pretty shit situation comparatively, but they were just like, I don't have to stress about work, school, whatever.
Yeah, I've never been in a better situation than I am now, but during COVID, I've never felt less suicidal than I do currently. I feel fucking great. I'm glad
to hear that. That word of day app's really got you focused.
Yeah, I'm having afternoon naps. I'm growing hair, making sandwiches. What I did want to say though, in regards to things going back to normal, it was kind of scary this week to see that the government said they were going to increase benefits for people who were employed and lost their jobs due to COVID, but not for all beneficiaries.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and this is one of those really, really challenging moments where you kind of have to go, so what was on the table, right, is we were in these negotiations, and, well, I wasn't personally. This was relayed to me by my colleagues Jan Logie and Marama Davidson, our co-leader. On the table is basically take it or leave it. We will increase benefits or create this new kind of second tier of benefits for people who have just recently lost their jobs. And of course, the immediate comeback was, well, why don't you just lift benefits for everybody? Because basically what's inherent in this kind of assertion is that currently the core benefit is not enough for people to live on.
Yes.
And the real challenge, particularly when people are suffering urgently right now, is saying, actually, we're going to stand in the way of that. So we had to make this kind of judgment call of going, this is important. We do need to raise benefits, but simultaneously we need to make sure that people have access to money right now. But we use that as a precedent, as a yardstick for showcasing how inadequate current benefit levels are, which then opens up the Pandora's box of that conversation yet again and enables us to continue campaigning and pushing forward.
Yeah.
And also it showcases where the other parties are on this issue. If the Greens were in government, we would be changing the taxation system. We would be making sure that nobody was below the poverty line. But we have 8 seats, and we push as hard as we can. We do everything that we can. But there is a difference between structural and cultural change. And structural change is subsidies and incentives, support systems, taxation, all of those bits and pieces, law, regulation. The other side of stuff is cultural change. And culture by definition is about a shared set of values. And it's really important to recognize that, because we often use culture as synonymous with ethnicity or religion or somebody's geographical backgrounds, but they're not exactly the same things. They can be proxies to understand it, but it's fundamentally about a shared set of values. And that's how we come to have a coherent society. But the thing about culture is that is about creating the environment that's conducive to structural change. And speaking to Dom's point before around how, we still have this real conservative bent, the problem is trying to drum up the attention and mandate for that structural change as far as it comes to raising the core benefit levels. So,
well, you know what's ironic is if they just let them all go on the actual dole, then a lot of those people would have realised, you know what I mean? Like,
don't get me started. And that's the thing, right, is that we end up unintentionally buffering a bunch of people from experiencing something that everybody else experiences.
and then they missed out on getting good at shoplifting as well, which, you know, so we're taking that away from them too.
I couldn't get engaged in that conversation at all. But what I could say is that oftentimes that is representative of a cry for help, John.
It's
crazy. My love of avocados is what got me into it.
It's crazy that there's tears for the benefit, and the message it sends to us is some people are more deserving of more money for being in the same situation as someone else. That's fucking insane.
Didn't we always know that? Didn't we always know that, Todd? But now the writing's on the wall, right?
Yeah.
We always knew that was the way that certain people thought about things. We always knew that there was this inherent tension, this bizarre belief that some people deserve to be poor.
Yeah.
And, you know, on top of that if you punish them more, maybe they'll stop being poor. And that is the thing that I hope that we finally crack wide open and go that this is just entirely unacceptable. Because you even have some right-wingers who, I mean, maybe they're just being contrarians, but, you know, they're coming to the conversation now and saying, oh, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And we're recognizing why the social kind of welfare system exists.
Yeah.
We created it after, in the 1930s, after the World Wars, during the Great Depression, when everybody was experiencing massive strife, job losses were rampant, and, you know, you had to survive. And we recognize the importance of all of us in a social contract, all living in society together. You don't have a coherent, cohesive society when too many people are unable to survive.
Yeah. Well, this could be a landmark moment, particularly if this gets amended. So what's the best way to be loud about this? How do we voice our displeasure?
The best way to be loud about this is to use your art forms to be loud about it. For real, like you know your talents, you know your skill sets, and the more that you proliferate this message and give people the opportunity to have their voice heard and to feel as though they're being represented and to do their bit and to contribute, the more that we proliferate this conversation through culture, and we end up having that cultural conversation which is conducive to structural change. But, you know, it has to be constructive. We have to be proposing a solution, and the solution is, you know, hey, the problem recognizes that right now core benefits are not at adequate levels. Here's what you gave to, you know, this bunch of newly unemployed people. Maybe that's what we should raise all benefits to at the very least.
Yeah.
We're up to an hour or more probably, so I guess we should let you go. But thank you so much. It was awesome.
Yeah.
No, you guys are mean. Look good. After yourselves.
You nearly explained neoliberalism as well as we did as well. So.
You should go back and listen to our one.
You need to tell me which episode.
We'll get Dan to cut it out and make a soundbite for you.
So bad. Just to
amazing.
Just to sign off, Chloe, you're running in the Auckland Central seat this year.
Yeah, bro. I'm running in Auckland Central, Tamaki Makaurau Hard, centre of the universe, my universe at least. I actually, no one knows this, so it's coming out on, I've got 1010. I got the postcode. Show me another candidate for Auckland Central who has the freaking postcode tattooed on them.
It's inside you. And you're up against Nikki K, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to all of the facades of kind of liberalism and, you know, common sense being matched with the fact that she is now very much married to the conservatism inherent in the National Party.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, let us know about what organising is going to take place and how we can contribute, and we can get our 400 listeners to contribute as well. And we're there.
Yes, go join the Greens. Honestly, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that because I end up I'm told on all of these things that I do that I'm not allowed to be political. Everything is political. If you breathe air, drink water, eat food, if you want a roof over your head, at the end of the day, the quality, affordability, and accessibility of all of those things is determined by political decisions. So if you are not engaged in creating those political decisions, someone else is making those decisions for you.
You hear that,
and
Dan?
Don't let those bad guys do it.
Dan was nodding as though he was giving Chloe permission to be political. So it's okay with us.
You guys are mean. Just go join, get involved, fight for something, because the people who are happy with the way that things are not going to be fighting for change. They'll be fighting to keep it how it is.
Oh yeah.
We'll spend some of that Patreon money.
Yeah.
Get it going, guys. All right, I'll catch you later.
Thanks so much,
See you, Chloe.
See you, Rose.
Bye-bye.